Managing geospatial data, some assembly required. Applying geospatial concepts is a science. So first, we gather knowledge through some form of observation. Then we do research or systematic measurement of these observations. We then sort by attributes, sometimes color or texture, stuff like that, and examine based on how that attribute varies across our observations. Also, information collected from individual cases, people, organizations, businesses, and so on is then interpreted across the group. So we have qualitative and quantitative data. Data can be classified as being qualitative or quantitative. More alternatives for statistical analysis and mapping when the data are quantitative. So with qualitative data, you have labels or names used to identify an attribute of each element. It can either be numeric or non-numeric, and statistical analysis for qualitative data are limited. With quantitative data, you can look at how many or how much. With how many are counted, we have discrete data. With how much or it's being measured, it is continuous. There's no separation between the possible values for the data and continuous data, and it's always numeric, so math is always an option. And we'll get more into different types of quantitative data in a second. So to put it a little bit more clearly, so if you make a statement, a qualitative statement, I drink coffee every day, it's descriptive information. When it becomes quantitative, it can be numerical information. So you have your discrete counted. I drink 4 cups of coffee every day. Or continuous, where it's measured. I drink 80 grams of coffee every day. Principles of spatial data. Almost all human activities require knowledge about the Earth, past, present, or future. Representations help us assemble far more knowledge about the Earth than is possible on our own. We live in a world where things occupy space. In order to be able to analyze these things in a GIS, we need to model or represent them in a computer environment. Data in a GIS represent a simplified view of physical entities, the roads, mountains, accident locations, or other features we wish to identify. Data include information on the spatial location and extent of these entities, and information on their non-spatial properties. Tobler's first law. Everything is related to everything else, but near things are more related than distant things. There are 2 primary types of geospatial models, vector data models and raster data models. The types of data models used are dependent upon the spatial nature and geometry of the feature they represent. If this is the real world, here are the vector and raster representations. So we have vectors, which uses points, lines, and polygons, and rasters. Each grid cell indicates what on the ground at that particular location. So which is better at representing things out there in the real world? This often depends on the type of entity of the phenomena you're trying to represent. But the reality is both of these are abstractions. Neither one is perfect. In a vector model, points could represent houses. Points don't have dimension. Most things in a vector are zero-dimensional objects anyways. A line could represent a river, but again, it's a single dimension, no width or depth. A polygon could delineate forest boundaries. And in a raster model, a house would occupy an area on the ground equal to the cell dimension. Same with the trees and so on. So again, neither is perfect. There's advantages and disadvantages, and we'll talk about that more in detail later. So if we go back to discrete and continuous, again, you have those 2 categories of real-world entities or phenomena. With discrete data, it's separate and distinct with definite boundaries. So you can do a road, a river, a sidewalk, a farm field, a fire hydrant, etc. And so you would want to use a vector data model to represent your discrete data. For continuous data, which is no definite boundaries or well-defined shapes, you have elevation, temperature, rainfall, soil moisture, and you would want to use a raster data model primarily to represent any kind of continuous data. So let's talk about geospatial data files. Right now we're going to be working with vector shape files, and you'll see what I'm talking about once you start working through the first lab. So a shapefile is actually a group of multiple files. When you're looking at shapefiles in Windows Explorer, you'll see that it looks like you have multiple files, but when you're working in ArcMap, it'll just be one shapefile and it'll look something like this. And each shapefile, the icon will let you know whether it's a polygon, a line, or a point file. Once you start working with ArcMap more, you'll start to recognize them. Don't worry about that information right now. The most important thing is that you cannot move shapefiles in Windows Explorers. You can't copy and paste. You can't move one of these groups of, like if you try to move one of these files individually, that whole shapefile will be corrupted and ArcGIS won't be able to read it. So it's really important when you're managing your data files that you're managing everything in ArcCatalog and not Windows Explorer. These files probably do not make much sense at the moment, and that is okay. Understanding this under the hood level of detail is beyond the scope of this course, and all you really need to know for now is that the folder and files work together to construct the shapefile. Removing any one of these pieces corrupts the data and makes it unusable. Also make sure to complete the readings. The explanation into geospatial data files is a lot more extensive within that, and it'll really help to explain the concepts between managing these geospatial data files. So really quickly, I'm going to go over metadata. So data about the data. Who made it? How was it made? When was it made? It helps us know if it's what we need. Metadata are information about spatial data. It describes the content, source, lineage, methods, developer, coordinate system, extent, structure, spatial accuracy, attributes, and the responsible organization. So metadata aids organizations in evaluating data to determine if they are suitable enough for an intended use. It protects data creators from misuse of GIS layers. The Federal Geographic Data Committee, or FGDC, created the standard for digital geospatial metadata. Whenever you download data from online, or if you're acquiring data from a different source, you want to make sure to check out the metadata because it's going to give you all the information that you need as far as coordinate systems, spatial reference, origins of the data, creators of the data, etc. Also, if you're ever creating data, it's a good idea to create your own metadata file because then if you ever share that data with anybody else, all of that information is going to be right there in the data package. Okay, so where do we get all of this data? First of all, we could collect it ourselves. So here we have a couple people out surveying land. This is a vehicle equipped with a Google camera collecting data for Google Earth and for Google Maps. Here we have a couple of gentlemen using a drone to acquire data. And this is another example of a surveyor out in the field. Another way is we can access it from places that have already collected the data. So the next few slides I'm going to go through pretty quickly. It just shows you different sources of online data where you can acquire GIS data for different types of projects that you want to be working on. So we have the Census website, National Atlas, National Historic GIS, and all of these links and data resources will be provided in the lecture slides that'll be at the bottom of the Module 1 page.